And new tonight, nurses are set to hold a protest outside Del Sol Medical Center in El Paso, insisting that the hospital isn't taking steps to protect them from COVID-19. Kfox 14 News at 5's Keenan Willer joins us live from the west side to show us what has led up to this protest tonight.
In just over an hour, nurses from both the Las Palmas and Del Sol Medical Centers will be gathering right here in front of Del Sol Medical Center to protest the way that both hospitals have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. On Monday, Las Palmas Medical Center reported that one of its doctors had tested positive for COVID-19. But the Las Palmas Del Sol Healthcare Workers Union tells me that doctor should never have been allowed inside the hospital in the first place. The union says earlier last month, that doctor took a trip outside of El Paso, and when she returned, the hospital did not require her to self-quarantine. Instead, she returned directly to work in the labor and delivery ward at Las Palmas. On Monday last week, she became seriously ill, throwing up and causing the nurses working around her to become concerned.
That's 40 to 50 staff members that you're taking out of the rotation for 2 weeks when this is expected to hit us in the next 3 to 6 weeks. Why would you risk that in taking out a force that could help you fight this?
The union says the doctor later tested positive for COVID-19 during the week, but hospital staff wasn't told about the positive test until Saturday night. The union says the hospital identified more than 50 doctors and nurses who had come in contact with the doctor and brought them in to be tested. The union says after staff was tested, they were sent back to work before their test results had come in. That's despite the El Paso Public Health Department saying people who come in contact with someone with COVID-19 should self-isolate for 14 days. The union says nurses called the union in tears, scared because they could be spreading COVID-19 to patients and staff.
That's 40 to 50 staff members that you're taking out of the rotation for 2 weeks when this is expected to hit us in the next 3 to 6 weeks. Why would you risk that in taking out a force that could help you fight this?
Kfox 14 News at 9, I'll have a recap of the upcoming protest, as well as why nurses at both hospitals say they still feel they don't have adequate personal protection equipment to fight against COVID-19. Kfox 14 reached out to both hospitals directly with all of the union's concerns that we just laid out. The hospital didn't respond to any of our questions. Again, that protest begins at 6:30 here at Del Sol Medical Center. From East El Paso, Keenan Willard, Kfox 14 News at 5.
And protests from Del Sol Medical Center nurses didn't have the turnout the Nurses Association was hoping for. Kfox 14 News at 9's Keenan Willard joins us live from East El Paso to show us why the nurses who did show up say they do consider tonight a success.
Tonight, nurses from both the Las Palmas and Del Sol Medical Centers participated in a nationwide protest of healthcare workers who feel their hospitals weren't prepared for COVID-19. And while the turnout wasn't what they'd anticipated, the nurses who did show up for tonight's protest say their message was far more important than their numbers.
It's frustrating when you have to fight to save your community.
Tishna Soto is an emergency room nurse at Del Sol Medical Center. Instead of just heading home after work tonight, Soto and another nurse stood guard in front of the hospital, fighting for their fellow nurses.
We were asking if they knew the protections that were required for COVID-19.
Soto was representing the Las Palmas Del Sol chapter of National Nurses United, a nurses union that held a countrywide protest tonight of hospitals that they feel aren't keeping healthcare workers safe from COVID-19. For Soto, the issue starts with the first case of COVID-19 at Las Palmas Del Sol.
That incident is what's pushing us forward to do this today, because that incident was, in my perspective, completely preventable.
On Monday, Las Palmas announced that one of its doctors had tested positive for COVID-19. The union says before testing positive, that doctor had just returned from an out-of-town trip, wasn't quarantined by the hospital, and began throwing up in the labor delivery ward. When asked if that was true, Las Palmas Del Sol said it had no comment. Soto says an issue nurses are still facing today involves personal protection equipment, or PPE.
You trust your workers enough as being an independent nurse, but you don't trust them to use the PPE the way they should. It shouldn't be locked.
Soto says access to PPE is highly restricted, and the supplies they do have aren't enough to keep them safe.
If a hospital in Florida, our sister hospital, is wearing N95 masks, why aren't we?
In a statement, Las Palmas Del Sol says the hospital is following CDC guidelines for using and conserving PPE, as well as enacting a universal masking policy for healthcare workers yesterday. Soto says even though the turnout for the protest wasn't what she'd envisioned, she still considers the night to be a success if it means people start taking the virus more seriously.
You're scared to speak up. You're scared to get reprimanded against. Well, I say bring it. It can get bad like that here, and I don't want that here in our city. We would never recover if it happened.
And nurses from Las Palmas and Del Sol are set to protest again tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in front of Las Palmas Medical Center. From East El Paso, Keenan Willard, Kfox 14 News at 9.